You hear governments saying there will be negligible radiological impacts on people and the environment because they can't actually say it will be safe according to scientific consensus. The IAEA approved TEPCO's nuclear wastewater plant in July of this year, so just last month. Until that point, TEPCO scientists had been working hard to collect data to show that the company's wastewater plant aligned with the IAEA's legal standards. As was already mentioned, the IAEA's legal standards are extremely narrow in their focus. They only require that scientists ask questions about chemistry and external radiation dose. That doesn't mean a lot if you're talking about internalizing these radionuclides or sending them out into complex ecosystems for decades. At the same time as this was happening, the Pacific Islands Forum gathered a group of independent, globally renowned scientists to review TEPCO's data and provide insights on the possible biological and ecological consequences of the wastewater release. So those scientists were trying to answer questions that were relevant to people in the Pacific. Unfortunately, the data they received from TEPCO could not adequately answer their questions. So the scientists working with the Pacific Islands Forum publicly voiced their scientific concerns about TEPCO's wastewater plan. Unfortunately, the IAEA completely disregarded these concerns when approving the plan. The IAEA also disregarded the concerns of other scientists, including scientists from more than 100 US-based marine laboratories who wrote a really important position paper in December 2022 expressing concerns about the scientific basis of the plan and how policies were not reflective of the most advanced scientific findings. They particularly pointed out how the underlying assumption that dilution is a solution to pollution is extremely outdated, and it completely ignores the reality of biological processes. This is the assumption and logic behind this dumping. So what were some of the main concerns shared by those scientists working with the Pacific Islands Forum? First, they said that TEPCO's data was, quote, incomplete, inadequate, and inconsistent, unquote. Second, they said that the IAEA did not follow its own standards, which would have required TEPCO clearly illustrated that countries beyond Japan received some sort of benefit from the wastewater discharge, and that any benefit they received would outweigh any possible harms. The scientists shared that the fact that there were absolutely no benefits to countries outside of Japan should disqualify the plan under the IAEA's own standards. They allowed Japan to say that this was not an issue, and so they kind of just let it go along. So Japan made the decision to dump, and there were no questions made about the benefits anywhere else. The third point was that, as was already mentioned, TEPCO has many other options for storing its own nuclear waste on land. These scientists even went out of their way to propose a plan which would involve using the wastewater to create concrete that could be used to patch up all of the leaks on site at Fukushima Daiichi and engage in other remedial work that is needed. However, Japan rejected the plan. One of the reasons was because this concrete would be classified as nuclear waste according to Japanese laws. So we can see in this case how the IAEA's legal approval allows Japan to discharge its own responsibilities for managing its nuclear waste on land by using the Pacific Ocean as its own dumping grounds. So we can see that TEPCO's wastewater discharge plan is scientifically questionable. It was also designed to serve the interests of TEPCO and the Japanese nuclear industry at the possible expense of people throughout Japan and the Pacific. But it also raises a number of really important questions about whether more states will start breaking from international norms and begin pursuing this option in the near future. So ocean dumping was the earliest method of nuclear waste disposal, and it largely ended with the implementation of international agreements such as the London Convention, which went into force in 1975, and the Treaty of Rarotonga, which went into force in 1986. And there were other international agreements such as the Convention on the Law of the Sea that set up legal mechanisms to hold states accountable for polluting the high seas. Japan's decision to release its nuclear wastewater into the Pacific Ocean goes against these international norms that we've worked really hard to establish, and it sets a dangerous precedent for what might come. So one way to ensure that ocean dumping of nuclear waste does not become a new normal practice again is for someone to file a case against Japan before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So a lot of people have been talking about this for a while. Back in November 2022, I joined others from the Nuclear Connections Across Oceania conference based at the University of Otago, and we encouraged the New Zealand government to do just that, to take Japan to court.
Yes.
The response we received was that the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade had full confidence in the IAEA. Foreign Minister Nanaya Mahuta reiterated her confidence in the IAEA and its, quote, science-based approach, unquote, after the agency's approval of TEPCO's plan in July 2023. She also shared that, quote, New Zealand continues to stand alongside Pacific partners to ensure their concerns are adequately taken on board, unquote. Unfortunately, the New Zealand government's words are not reflected in their actions. For example, the New Zealand government says it follows a science-based approach to TEPCO's wastewater release, but completely disregarded serious concerns raised by prominent international scientists, including the globally renowned scientists working with the Pacific Islands Forum, which are New Zealand's partners in the Pacific. The New Zealand government also said that they stand alongside their Pacific partners, but in reality, they constantly moved ahead in voicing their public support for the IAEA and constantly framing the concerns of people in the Pacific as somehow being non-evidence-based or unscientific. And there were some government documents released that really clearly showed this, even though, you know, in the public media, it's the way that they say, you know, science-based approach, concerns in the Pacific. It really makes it out to be a really strange hierarchy of knowledge there. And this has been the case even when Pacific peoples have many legitimate concerns that are beyond the scope of the IAEA's extremely narrow standards, and when scientists working with the Pacific Islands Forum were raising many valid scientific concerns about TEPCO's plan. So the science was under debate and still nothing was heard. It's time for the New Zealand government to be honest and follow their own directives. If they do follow a science-based approach, they need to publicly consider and address the concerns raised by scientists regarding the nuclear wastewater release and the relevance of the IAEA's extremely narrow and outdated standards. They should also stay true to their commitments to standing alongside their Pacific partners. This means following the lead of the Pacific Islands Forum and seriously engaging with all of their concerns, including the concerns raised by the scientists working with them. And going back to the beginning about nuclear colonialism, it's really important that the New Zealand government acknowledges that TEPCO's plan is a continuation of nuclear colonialism in the Pacific. And so it's really problematic to continue with this nuclear-free stance and then stand beside Japan as it is promoting nuclear colonialism in the Pacific. New Zealand has to think about what it's doing and make sure that its words are aligning with its actual actions. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Rebecca and Ray from Korean New Zealanders for a Better Future.
My name's Rebecca, this is Ray. We are two members of Korean New Zealanders for a Better Future. And we're here today as people living in Aotearoa, also as Korean, who are another group of people whose government has kind of failed them in this issue by allowing the dumping of wastewater to go ahead with essentially their consent. So we have a written statement that we'll read together to you in Korean and English, and of course I want to tautoko the words of Darlene and Dr. Birch, who have spoken before us.
예, 안녕하세요. 여러분들은 그리고 이 땅에 살고 계신 모든 사람들은 바다로 둘러싸여 있는 뉴질랜드에서 살고 있으며 앞으로도 바다와 함께 생활하고 바다를 쳐다보며 살 것입니다.
Everyone here today and everyone living on this land, Aotearoa, are surrounded by the ocean and will continue to live alongside and look out over the ocean throughout our lives.
어제부터 일본은 후쿠시마 원자력 발전소 사고로 발생한 방사능 오염수를 바다에 방류하기 시작했습니다.
Since yesterday, the Japanese government has started releasing radiation-contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant meltdown into the ocean.
자연재해로 인한 원자력 사고는 예측하기 어렵다고 하지만 그 사후 대책이 바다로 오염수를 흘려보내는 것이라면 이것은 인류 재앙을 가져오는 출발점이 될 수 있다고 생각합니다.
We could say that a nuclear accident due to natural disasters was difficult to predict. However, if the response is to let irradiated wastewater to flow into the ocean, this could signal the start of a catastrophe for humankind.
하지만 일본 정부와 국제원자력기구는 오염수를 해양에 배출하는 것 이외에 다른 대안, 즉 장기간 밀봉을 한 후 저장하는 방법이나 매립 등의 방법을 제시하지 않은 채 오로지 해양 방류를 선택하였습니다.
However, the Japanese government and the IAEA have chosen to focus solely on dumping the wastewater into the ocean rather than considering other options such as long-term containment.
수많은 생명 파괴와 위험을 안고 지금 이 순간 핵 오염수는 바다를 흐르고 있습니다. 일본의 작은 오촌에서 제주도의 해녀들로 태평양섬 국가들을 넘어 이곳 아오테아로아까지 우리의 정부는 무관심한 채 있지만 더 많은 수의 우리들은 오염수 방류를 반대하며 여기에 서 있습니다.
At this moment, nuclear wastewater is being dumped into the ocean with little regard for the multitude of ways that this may cause harm. From the fishing villages in Japan to the Henyo divers of Jeju Island, across many Pacific Island nations to Aotearoa, our governments may have acquiesced to the arguments of the Japanese government and the nuclear lobby, but many more of us are standing up in opposition.
이 모든 사실을 알고 오염수를 바다에 방류하는 행위는 바다와 함께 사는 우리 인간과 모든 생명체의 미래의 세대까지 건강하게 살 권리를 침해하는 것으로 볼 수 있습니다.
To forge ahead with dumping wastewater into the ocean, despite knowing this, can only be seen as a breach of the rights of all people, all life, and of future generations who live with the ocean.
일본 정부와 국제원자력기구는 지금이라도 핵 오염수 방류를 즉각 중단하고 새로운 대안을 찾아 마련해야 됩니다. 여러분, 바다는 우리 생명의 근원입니다. 어떤 쓰레기도 바다에 버려서 안 되며 작은 물고기는 잡아서 안 된다는 상식이 우리 모두를 공유하고 있습니다. 그리고 바다는 삶의 터전일 뿐만 아니라 때로는 구름으로, 때로는 빗물로 우리에게 직접 다가옵니다. 그렇게 우리는 바다를 통해 생명을, 기쁨을 또는 위로를 받으며 공존하고 있습니다.
Although late, the IAEA and the Japanese government must immediately stop the dumping and find a new alternative. Everyone, the ocean is our source of life. We share the common knowledge not to throw even our regular rubbish into the sea and to be mindful of how we gather food from the ocean. Not only is it the background to our lives, it visits us sometimes as clouds and sometimes as rain. We are in symbiosis with the ocean and it gives us strength, joy, and at times comfort.
뉴질랜드 정부는 일본의 핵 오염수의 해양 방류를 적극 반대해야 합니다.
The New Zealand government must actively oppose Japan's dumping of nuclear wastewater into the ocean.
핵 오염수가 더 이상 바다로 흘러 들어가지 않도록 함께 당장 행동해 주십시오.
Act with us now to stop the continuing flow of nuclear wastewater into the ocean.
태평양을 지키자.
Protect the Pacific Ocean.
Kia ora, thank you. Marco from Te Kauwaka, please come up.
Kia ora koutou, talofa lava, malang suku mau, malang ma, My name is Marco de Jong, co-director of Te Waka, the organisation formerly known as New Zealand Alternative, and we're here standing in solidarity with affected communities in the Pacific as they continue their struggles for nuclear justice. My suggestion today is that the waste dumping is part of a much broader story. Continued nuclear colonialism facilitated through secrecy and power, and a broader movement, an intergenerational movement for the health of our oceans, guided by Indigenous knowledge and a grassroots regionalism. I briefly wanted to talk about New Zealand's role in the 1980s movement to oppose Japanese nuclear waste dumping, which resulted in the MOANA Convention, as an example of how a regional movement for the MOANA, the health of our oceans, can make a better world for everybody. And a reminder to our government that these things matter, and our international image and global image as a bastion of liberal internationalism and defender of the rules-based international order is based upon principled opposition to injustice. In 1979, Japan revealed plans to dump 500,000 barrels of nuclear wastewater north of the Northern Marianas Trench. It caused widespread regional opposition, and in 1982, Pacific nations gathered in Rarotonga for a hui on the human environment in the South Pacific. It was modelled on the 1972 Stockholm Conference. There, Guam came up with a bold plan to go to the London Dumping Convention and use Kiribati and Guam to advance a total prohibition or moratorium on the dumping of all nuclear waste at sea. This was stonewalled in a series of regional meetings from 82 through 86 by Britain, who is the largest ocean dumper of nuclear waste, and others. Of course, the Pacific also wanted to ban nuclear testing, so France opposed it in a similar way, and America did not want to preclude the option of dumping nuclear waste in the high sea pockets of the proposed MOANA Convention area. So they also strong-armed the Pacific for a series of meetings. In the end, the regional opposition to nuclearism was so intense that New Zealand and Australia went to ANZUS meetings and convinced the Pentagon, Department of Defense, as well as moderates within the State Department, that if they would not adopt a more constructive attitude within the MOANA Convention negotiations, that the US risked losing their ability to have nuclear warships throughout the Pacific. And so America ended up ceding its high sea rights to dump nuclear waste in the several pockets of the MOANA Convention. And that is why in 1986, the signature of the MOANA Convention went through and created what is arguably an indigenous regime of ocean governance opposed to the dumping of nuclear waste. That language carries through to the Rarotonga Convention and the 1995 Waiangani Convention. So what we have and what New Zealand has been a part of is a regional regime that prohibits the spoliation of the sacred ocean. And that regime stands. That is the basis of how we can oppose this on principle. And we can't simply turn back. I'm standing here because in the Pacific, Japanese attempts to erode a Pacific consensus have created compounded harms for activists within Fiji. Marshallese activists. Sitiveni Rambuka was on Twitter bullying activists. It is compounding harms for our peoples, and it's breaking down our ability to resist ongoing colonialism and the effects of climate change, and the fact that our ocean is very quickly becoming, a sacrifice zone, and we need to stand up against this. And so I suggest that we consider this as part of a broader story and an action that stands against the normalization of this type of behavior, and we should oppose it on principle and as the thin end of a wedge. Kia ora koutou, whawhata lava.
Thank you, Marco. From Fridays for Future, we have Sherry.
Hi everyone, my Chinese name is Gao Yuan, and I'm from Fridays for Future, also 350. So I'm going to start my speech in Chinese because that's my mother language. And the source of this article is from China Atomic Energy Authority. And I'll just read it in Chinese and then read the English so everyone can understand. 中国代表团关于福岛第一核电站事故核污水处置问题的工作文件简卷，日方没有证明核污染水净化装置的长期有效性和可靠性。从日方多核素处理系统以往运转的情况看，已证明无法有效去除放射性核素。能否有效去除其他放射性核素，也有待进一步实验和工程验证。据日方自己公布的数据，经 ALPS 处理的核污水仍然有70%未达到排放标准，需再次净化处理。在后续长期运行的过程中 ，ALPS 的性能和有效性、可靠性可能还会随着设备老化进一步下降。除130多万吨待排放核污染水外，福岛核电站未来还将产生大量核污染水。日方 ALPS 能否有效处理数量巨大、成分复杂的核污染水，仍存疑问。日方没有证明核污染水数据的真实准确性。东京电力公司近年来曾多次隐瞒篡改本国自己收集的核污染水数据，机构仅基于日本单方面提供的数据和信息开展审查评估，仅对日方采集的少量核污染水样本开展实验室间比对分析，在数据真实性和信息准确性有待确证、取样独立性和代表性严重不足的情况下，即使机构审查评估做出排海符合安全标准的结果，也缺乏足够的说服力。So I'm just reading in English right now. So I'm quoting from the working paper of the Chinese delegation on the disposal of nuclear wastewater from Fukushima nuclear power plant accident. The Japan side has not proved the long-term effectiveness and reliability of nuclear contaminated water purification device. Judging from the previous operation of the Japanese ALPS processing system, it has been proved that it cannot effectively remove all the nuclear waste and contained in the water, and it does not meet any standards to release that, or it's safe to drink. I remember reading on the news there is like a politician from Japan claimed that it's safe to drink about 10 years ago. I don't know where he ends up now. I hope he's fine. But even he ends up in hospital, I think, yeah, that's fair enough. And also, quoting from the data released by Japan itself, about 70% of the nuclear contaminated water treated by ALPS still fails to meet discharge standards and needs to be purified again. During the subsequent long-term operation of ALPS, the performance, effectiveness, and reliability of ALPS may further deteriorate as the equipment ages. In addition to more than 1.3 million tons of nuclear contaminated water to be discharged, the Fukushima nuclear water plant will produce a large amount of nuclear contaminated water in the future. Doubts remain about whether Japanese ALPS can effectively and reliably handle the huge amount of the complex composition of nuclear contaminated water in the long run. Third, the Japanese side has not proved the authenticity and accuracy of the data on the nuclear contaminated water. In recent years, Tokyo Electric Power Company has repeatedly concealed and falsified data on nuclear contaminated water. The agency conducted review and assessment only on the basis of data and information provided by Japan, and conducted comparison and analysis between labs on a small number of nuclear contaminated water samples collected by Japan. In the case that authenticity of the data and accuracy information needs to be confirmed, the independence and representatives of the sample are seriously insufficient. Even if the agency concluded that the discharge meets the safety standard, it will not be convincing enough. And I'm trying to finish my speech now. I saw on the news, and I have friends like recently gone a trip, travel to Japan, and I honestly worry about their safety. Like I saw on the news, the seafood, the fish market in Japan is empty right now. And what the Japanese government is doing, they literally arrested Korean students protesting outside. What kind of government regime is that? And China banned all the seafood imports from Japan. They are blaming us. And I don't get their rationale. Yeah. And the Japanese government, they spend 70 billion to put on social media and propaganda instead of treating the nuclear wastewater. That's quite insane. So yeah, I'll just finish my speech. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to just open the floor if anybody else would like to say anything before we wrap up. No, kia ora. All right, thank you everybody for coming. May I ask anyone who took photos or videos to go ahead and post those on the event page so we can all share those out and get the word out there. This is not something we're just doing today and then leaving behind us. This is something we're going to keep standing for. Their plan is to release the water gradually over the next 30 years. So every day that we stand against that and challenge that, you know, we're doing what needs to happen right now. And us standing, as we heard in history, it makes a difference and we can turn the tides. So, Fire, may I call on you? Oh. Yes. Oh yes, let's get a photo up at the front here along this line with all of our banners before we go. But Fire, may I please call on you for a closing karakia before we do that?
Just before I do that, just really want to acknowledge all of the speakers and against everybody who's come out here, because even though you might not have spoken into this thing, we hear your hearts today. So thank you all very much. I'll close us with a karakia. E hoa ngā mano matota mawairu tapu me ngā hera pono. Whakaungia mai mātou tau.